The sun burned hot over the slave market of Torvax 9. Dust swirled in the dry air as traders shouted and buyers moved through the cages, inspecting those who had no choice but to stand silently behind iron bars. Most of the buyers were loud and cruel, pointing and laughing at the frightened aliens on display. Among the rows of cages, a young alien girl stood alone. Her skin was pale blue with a faint shimmer under the sun. Her wrists were locked in metal cuffs, and she kept her head down. Her small elf-like ears twitched with every loud voice or movement. She had been sold before, but this market felt worse. She had heard the rumors. Humans paid high prices not for work, but for suffering. She had been told that humans, especially older ones, were the cruelest of all. And then she saw him. A middle-aged human man stepped quietly into the market. His clothes were dusty from travel, and he wore a long coat that moved slightly with the breeze. Unlike the others, he wasn't shouting. He didn't carry a weapon. He looked around calmly, as if searching for something important. The girl watched him carefully, her heartbeat quickening. She hoped he would walk past her cage, but he stopped. He stared at her, not with the eyes of a hunter or master, but with something else, something she didn't recognize. Was it sadness? Pity? She couldn't tell. The trader beside her cage smiled. "You got good eyes, sir. This one's healthy and quiet, very obedient." The man didn't reply. He only looked at her. Then slowly, he asked, "How much?" The girl froze. The trader named a price. It was high, but the man didn't argue. He opened a pouch and handed over the payment. The gate opened. Her chains were unlocked, and for a moment she thought of running. But where would she go? She had nowhere to hide. So she followed him, heart pounding. He led her to a small transport, parked just outside the market. There were no other slaves inside, no chains, no cages. He opened the door and helped her in without touching her roughly. She sat quietly, her hands shaking. Then, to her surprise, he handed her a small bottle of water and a protein bar. She stared at them, confused. Was this part of a trick? "You're free to eat," he said softly. She didn't reply. Her eyes stayed on him as he moved to the pilot seat and started the engine. The ship lifted off, leaving the market behind. She kept waiting for the moment when the kindness would disappear, when he would turn angry, when he would prove that all the stories were true. But the silence in the ship was calm, not scary. Later, as the stars appeared in the window and the ship floated through the dark sky, she looked at the food again. Her voice was low, almost too soft to hear. "Why did you buy me?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at the stars and said, "Because no one else should have." The ship flew quietly through space. The stars outside blinked slowly, but inside the cabin silence filled the air. The young alien girl sat still, the unopened water bottle resting in her lap. She didn't know if she should trust it. Maybe it was a test. The man, his name still unknown to her, was focused on flying the ship. He didn't talk much, and he didn't look angry. That confused her even more. Every owner before him had shouted or made demands, but this one hadn't even raised his voice. After some time, he turned to her and asked gently, "Are you cold?" She didn't answer. She just hugged her arms to her chest. He stood up and walked to a nearby locker. He pulled out a soft gray blanket and walked back slowly, holding it out for her. She stared at it, then at him. "I won't hurt you," he said quietly. She took the blanket without speaking and wrapped it around herself. It was warm. It smelled clean. It made her feel safe for the first time in a long while. He returned to his seat, leaned back and closed his eyes for a few minutes. She watched him closely. He didn't sleep deeply, just rested. He looked tired, like someone who had seen too much of the galaxy. Later, he brought out some simple food and placed a bowl near her. Steam rose from it gently. "Eat if you're hungry." Still unsure, she picked up the bowl and sniffed the contents. It was a warm soup, basic but filling. Carefully, she took a small sip. Her eyes widened. It wasn't poisoned. It tasted good. She finished half the bowl and then stopped. She didn't want to seem greedy. She placed it down and looked at him again. He gave a small nod. Good. You need your strength. This time she finally asked, "What is your name?" The man looked surprised. "Rick," he said. "My name is Rick." She repeated it in her mind. It was short, simple, and didn't sound dangerous. Rick checked the ship's systems and then spoke again. "We'll reach my place in a few hours. It's not big, but it's quiet and safe." She looked down. "Am I still your property?" Rick shook his head. "No, you're not my property. I just didn't want someone else to buy you." Her heart beat faster. She didn't understand. No one did that without a reason. Then why? Why do all this? Rick didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, "Because you looked like you had no one, and I know what that feels like." She sat in silence thinking about his words. Later, when he wasn't looking, she reached for the rest of the soup and quietly finished it. For the first time in many days, her stomach felt full. As the ship moved through the stars, she slowly leaned back in her seat, still wrapped in the blanket. Her eyes grew heavy. Sleep came softly. Rick glanced at her, making sure she was warm. Then he sighed and looked out the window. He whispered to himself, "She deserves better." The ship finally landed on a quiet green planet. Trees surrounded the landing pad and birds flew in the sky. It didn't look like a place where bad things happened. It looked peaceful. Rick stepped out first and checked the area. Then he turned and nodded at the alien girl. She stepped out slowly, still unsure. The soft wind touched her skin. The air smelled clean. It was nothing like the dusty markets or the metal cages she knew. Rick walked ahead and pointed at a small house hidden among trees. "That's my place," he said. "You can stay as long as you want. No one will bother you here." She followed him carefully. Inside, the house was simple. One large room with a bed, a small kitchen, and shelves filled with books and tools. There were no locks, no chains, no weapons on the walls. It felt strange. He showed her a bed in the corner. "You can sleep here. There's hot water if you want to wash up. Clean clothes, too." He motioned to a drawer with folded shirts and soft pants. She looked at the clothes, then at him. "These are for me?" "Yes," he replied. "You don't have to wear the old ones." She held the fabric in her hands. It was soft, real cloth, not slave rags. Later, she stood under warm water for the first time in years. The feeling made her cry, though she didn't understand why. She cleaned herself and wore the new clothes. When she walked out, Rick was making food. He placed 2 bowls on the table. "You can eat with me," he said kindly. She sat down across from him. The food smelled good. Fresh vegetables, soft bread, and hot soup. She ate slowly, still watching him. After a while, she finally asked, "Why did you become a buyer?" Rick put his spoon down. He looked at the wall for a moment before answering. "I used to be a soldier," he said. "Fought in the Orion Wars. Saw too many bad things. After the war, I came here to find peace. But peace isn't real if others are still suffering." She listened quietly. "I went to that market to stop at least one more bad thing from happening." Rick continued. "I saw your eyes. You reminded me of someone I failed to save long ago." The room was silent for a moment. She lowered her head. "Thank you for saving me." He gave her a small smile. "You're not a slave here. You're free. Take your time, heal, learn, rest." That night she walked around the house, touching the books, feeling the walls, testing the floor like a curious child. It was all new. In the corner she found a small music player. When she pressed a button, soft music filled the room. Gentle, sounds not loud or sharp, peaceful tones. She sat down and listened for a long time. Before going to sleep, she looked at Rick, who was reading a book on his bed. "Can I ask something?" she said. "Of course." "Do I need to work for you to stay?" Rick shook his head. No, you don't owe me anything. She blinked, confused. Then what should I do? He smiled. Just live. That's enough. She laid down, the soft blanket covering her. For the first time in a long time, she fell asleep without fear. To be continued in Part 4. The days passed quietly on the peaceful planet. The alien girl slowly adjusted to her new life. Each day brought something new: warm meals, calm mornings, and peaceful nights. She began to smile a little. She no longer flinched when Rick walked into the room. She started to feel safe. One morning, she was sitting on the porch watching the birds in the trees. Rick joined her, carrying 2 cups of hot tea. He handed one to her, and they sat in silence for a while. Finally, she broke the quiet. "My name is Lyra," she said softly. Rick looked at her and nodded. "That's a beautiful name." She took a sip of tea and looked at the sky. "I haven't said it out loud in years." "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," Rick said gently, but Lyra shook her head. "I want to. You saved me. I think you should know." Rick stayed quiet, letting her speak when she was ready. "I was taken when I was very young," she began. "My planet was attacked by raiders. They destroyed our village and captured anyone they could find." She paused, her hands shaking slightly around the cup. "I remember hiding with my little brother in a storage room. I told him to be quiet. But they found us anyway." Her voice trembled. Rick placed a calming hand near her. Not touching, just showing he was there. "I haven't seen my family since that day. I was sold many times, different places, different owners. Some were worse than others. I stopped talking. I stopped hoping." Lyra looked at him, eyes full of pain. "When I saw you at the market, I thought you would be just like the others." "I understand," Rick said quietly. "You had every reason to think that." She looked down at her hands. "But you weren't." Rick leaned back in his chair. "I've done things in my past I'm not proud of. During the war, I saw many lose everything. I couldn't help them. When the war ended, I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to help even one person, I would." Lyra blinked back tears. "You kept your promise. You helped me." They sat in silence again, both thinking about their pasts. Later that day, Rick gave Lyra a small tablet with books translated into her language. Some were about Earth's history, some were stories she read every day. Her favorite was a story about a bird that was trapped in a cage and learned to fly again. In the evenings, Rick would teach her how to cook simple meals or repair small tools. They didn't talk much, but there was comfort in the quiet. One night, while helping Rick fix a light outside the house, Lyra asked, "Why do you live alone?" Rick smiled faintly. "I used to have a family, but the war took that away." Lyra nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "You don't need to be. Life gives us pain, but it also gives us chances. Meeting you gave me one." Lyra looked at him, understanding something deep for the first time. "I don't feel like a slave anymore," she whispered. Rick looked into her eyes and said, "That's because you're not. You never were. You just needed someone to remind you." The peaceful days on the quiet planet couldn't last forever. One afternoon, while Lyra was tending to a small garden Rick helped her plant, a loud sound echoed from above. A supply ship landed near the edge of the forest clearing. Rick stepped out to meet it, expecting regular delivery items. But this time, the man who stepped out wasn't just a delivery pilot. He wore a sharp uniform and carried a small data pad. His eyes scanned Rick carefully. "Name's Bren. I work with local trade authorities," he said. "Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Rick crossed his arms. "Go ahead." Bren glanced at the small house and the garden behind him. "We've heard rumors. A human bought a young alien girl from the Torvax 9 slave market, but didn't return her to the registry. That's against policy." Rick kept his voice calm. "She's not a slave. I don't own her. She lives here freely." "Even so," Bren said, "many traders are upset. They say you took something valuable and didn't follow the system. Some even say you're planning something dangerous. Lyra, hearing their voices, came closer but stayed hidden behind the trees. Rick stood firm. I didn't break any laws. She's safe here. That's all that matters. Bren narrowed his eyes. Well, just a warning. Some of those traders aren't known for waiting patiently. If they think you've cost them credits, they might come looking for you. Or her. Rick watched the ship lift off again, leaving a cloud of dust behind. That evening, Lyra sat quietly near the fire. Are they coming for me? She asked. Rick looked into the flames. Maybe. But I won't let them take you. Not without a fight. Lyra's voice trembled. You don't have to risk yourself. I can run. I've done it before. Rick shook his head. You've done enough running. This is your home now. If we give that up, they win. The next few days were tense. Rick began checking the perimeter of the forest, setting up small alerts in case of visitors. He dug out an old handheld blaster but hoped he wouldn't need it. Lyra wanted to help. She fixed lights, carried supplies, and learned how to use the emergency beacon. She didn't want to feel helpless anymore. Then one night it happened. A loud noise shook the house. Lights from outside flashed through the windows. Rick grabbed his gear. Lyra stood beside him, scared but ready. 3 figures approached the house, weapons in hand. They shouted, demanding Rick return the property he stole. Rick stepped outside. She's not property, he said loudly. She's free. The men laughed. That's not how the galaxy works, old man. Rick didn't move. Then maybe the galaxy needs to change. Suddenly, lights turned on all around the property. Several neighbors, humans and aliens, had come after hearing the noise. They stood together, unarmed but firm. One of them, an older woman, stepped forward. We know what he's done. He gave someone a second chance. That's not a crime. The traders looked around and realized they were outnumbered. They muttered something and left, their ship disappearing into the sky. Lyra stood beside Rick, her hands shaking. You stood for me, she said. Rick smiled faintly. You're not alone anymore. After the traders left, the forest around Rick's home became quiet again. But the silence was different this time. It wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. Lyra couldn't sleep that night. She kept thinking about the men who came, the weapons they carried, and the cruel words they spoke. She had run from fear all her life. Now, for the first time, someone stood between her and danger. Rick didn't talk much that evening. He sat near the fire, cleaning his old blaster and checking the alert systems around the house. His face was calm, but his eyes were serious. In the morning, the neighbors who came to help returned. One of them was a tall alien man named Doro. He had lived nearby for years and rarely spoke to anyone before. He looked at Rick and said, You made them angry. They won't stop. I know, Rick replied. Doro glanced at Lyra. But you also made others brave. More people began to visit the small house. Humans, aliens, young and old. They brought tools, food, and even extra power cells. Some offered to help build stronger defenses. Others shared messages they had heard. More traders were planning to return, this time in greater numbers. Rick gathered the group. I didn't plan to start a fight, he said, but I won't let them take someone just because she was born different. If we let them do this, what's next? Who will they come for tomorrow? The group stood in silence. Then Doro spoke again. We fight, not with weapons, but with unity. And they did. Over the next 2 days, they built barriers around Rick's land. They set up signal jammers to block enemy communications. Watch towers were made from old scrap metal. Lyra helped organize supplies, made food, and watched the skies for signs of ships. She felt stronger now. She wasn't just being protected, she was protecting others too. When the traders returned, their ships hovered above the forest. They expected an easy win. Instead, they saw a wall of people standing together. Some had tools, others just stood firm, shoulder to shoulder. The lead trader stepped forward. Move now, or we take what's ours. Rick stepped in front. She is not yours, none of us are. A moment of silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, a local news drone appeared, floating in the sky. Someone had called the media. The camera lights turned on and the entire standoff was being broadcast across systems. The traitors hesitated. If they attacked now, it wouldn't be a simple deal. It would be a public disaster. One of them cursed under his breath and signaled the retreat. Their ships pulled back and disappeared into the clouds. Cheers broke out among the people. Some hugged, others laughed. Lyra stood still, her eyes wide with disbelief. Rick walked over to her and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. It's over. For now. Lyra looked up at him. We stopped them, all of us. He nodded. Because we stood together. That night they lit a fire under the stars. Music played softly from a speaker. People talked, shared food, and celebrated. No one treated Lyra like a slave, or even a rescued girl. She was simply one of them. She sat beside Rick and whispered, "You didn't just save me. You helped me find a place to belong." Rick smiled. "And you helped remind us what's worth protecting." A week had passed since the traitors were turned away. The village was no longer quiet and hidden. It had become a symbol. News about what happened spread quickly to nearby planets. People began visiting not just out of curiosity but with respect. Some came to offer help. Others came looking for the same peace Lyra had found. Lyra had changed. Her eyes were no longer filled with fear. She walked with confidence now. She helped fix machines, taught children how to grow food, and even shared stories from her own planet. She spoke more, laughed often, and smiled without hesitation. Rick noticed all of it. He watched her from a distance sometimes, proud but quiet. He never asked for thanks. That wasn't why he helped her. One morning, as the sun rose behind the hills, Lyra found Rick in the garden, trimming some plants. She stood beside him and said, "Rick, I've been thinking." He looked at her and nodded for her to continue. "I want to help others, like you helped me. There are still many who are afraid, alone, or trapped. If I can be a voice for them, maybe their stories will change too." Rick placed the tool down and smiled. "Then that's what you should do." Lyra sat beside him on a wooden bench. "But I want to stay connected to this place. This is my home now. You gave me that. It's your home as long as you want it to be," Rick replied. Later that day, a small group of travelers arrived. Among them was a young alien boy who reminded Lyra of her brother. He barely spoke, his eyes full of sadness. Lyra sat with him, gave him water, and wrapped a blanket around his shoulders, the same way Rick once did for her. "You're safe now," she said gently. "No one will hurt you here." The boy looked up slowly and gave a tiny nod. That evening, as the stars came out, the house was filled with soft light and quiet joy. People shared stories, music played from an old speaker, and laughter warmed the air. Lyra stood up and spoke to the group. "A long time ago, I was just like that boy, silent, afraid, and ready to give up. But someone gave me a chance. Not with big words or promises, but with kindness, food, and safety." She looked at Rick, who sat in the back with a cup of tea in his hand. "He showed me that the galaxy still has good people. Now, I want to be one of them." The room clapped softly. Rick smiled, proud and peaceful. When the night was over and most of the guests had gone to rest, Lyra sat next to Rick again. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Buying me?" Rick shook his head slowly. "No. It was the best choice I ever made." Lyra rested her head gently on his shoulder. "You didn't just save me, Rick. You helped me become myself again." Rick looked at the stars above and whispered, "And you reminded me what it means to be human." The wind blew gently through the trees. Peace had finally come, not just to Lyra, but to everyone who had chosen to stand for something better. And in that quiet place between the stars and the soil, A new life had truly begun.